One Piece is one of the greatest works of fiction known to man, and the One Piece arc that stands above them all is Marineford, the greatest war arc from any anime, comic book, or show ever made. And if you think I'm lying, all that means is that you clearly haven't watched One Piece yet. Marineford is the peak of the mountain. This single arc somehow manages to be the true introduction to the world factions of One Piece on chapter 550 somehow, while also being a well-written war between superpowered beings that use their destructive powers in combination with strategic plans to creatively outwit their opponents, while also telling a heartwarming story about the unconditional love that can exist between brothers, while also having mind-shatteringly amazing plot twists, while also being the emotional peak of one of the greatest stories ever told, the peak of One Piece, the horrors of war, the joys of love, and tons of amazing fights. It's all here in the greatest war arc that has ever been created and that ever will be created. And if another war arc somehow manages to surpass Marineford, it'll probably come from the final saga of One Piece. This video contains spoilers for the Summit War saga. However, I will be giving you a second spoiler warning later on so that you can watch a lot of the video without getting anything extremely big revealed. If I make you feel inspired to watch all of One Piece, then you have my permission to leave at any time and do that. And although Marineford is the peak of the entire story, in order to understand the emotional journey it sends you on, we have to start at the beginning of the Summit War saga, when the Straw Hat crew first landed in Sabaody Archipelago. For Luffy, that's the day where the course of his life would be changed forever. One Piece has always stood out as being more lighthearted and goofy than other popular anime. However, this gets turned on its head in Sabaody Archipelago, which is exactly what makes it so powerful. This is where One Piece gets dark. Shortly after arriving in the archipelago, Luffy has to watch a runaway slave have their head blown up only for a celestial dragon to shoot their corpse repeatedly. Of course, Luffy wants to fight, but his fishman guide Hachi covers his mouth and begs him to stop. Hachi informs Luffy that if they stand against the celestial dragons, then an admiral will be summoned to the island. So even if a dragon shoots someone, he has to stand down. Worse still, Luffy knows that he's right. The Straw Hats encountered Admiral Kuzan before, and his strength overpowered them so greatly that you couldn't even call it a fight. It was more like a god playing with toys, weighing their lives in his hands. Unfortunately for the Straw Hats, they are unable to stay out of conflict for long as their mermaid friend Kami is kidnapped and put on auction as a slave. At first, the Straw Hats try to buy their friend back peacefully, but their plan goes up in flames when a rich celestial dragon places an impossibly high bid on her. The Straw Hats are destroyed. Hachi is at his breaking point, and just when it seems like all hope is lost, Luffy breaks through the front door, ready to save the day like he always does. Luffy ignores the bidding war completely and charges forward to save his friend. Hachi runs after him, but not before he is shot down by the celestial dragon who bid on the mermaid. Luffy approaches the dragon, but he is stopped by Hachi. The fishman begs Luffy to follow his advice and not fight a dragon even if he sees someone get shot in front of him. Hachi prays that Luffy will see reason and let a pirate like him with a terrible past fade away, but Luffy is not a reasonable man. Luffy ignores Hachi's advice and breaks international law by punching the dragon in the face, just like we all knew that he would. No matter how many enemies he makes, Luffy will always beat up anyone who hurts his friends. And at first, everything goes great for Luffy like usual. Trafalgar Law and Captain Kidd are introduced both as pirates and temporary allies, and they help Luffy fight the Marines. And one of the slaves at the auction, the Dark King Rayleigh, turns out to be one of the strongest pirates the world has ever known. When he was younger, he was second in command to the legendary pirate king Gol D. Roger. He only let himself turn into a slave so that he could steal money from whatever rich asshole bought him. However, Luffy's rebellion has caused him to make a change of plans. Once Luffy is done fighting the Marines, the Straw Hats head to Rayleigh's shop to discuss their best next course of action. But this peaceful moment is torn apart when he finally arrives. Admiral Borsellino Kizaru, my favorite One Piece villain next to Doflamingo. He's like a 1970s disco dancer who settled for a lackluster day job that just so happens to be murdering anybody who opposes tyranny because he's too given up and tired to hold out for dreams. In that way, Kizaru is extremely relatable despite being a villain. His tired, passionless nature serves as a perfect contrast to Luffy's overly optimistic, childlike spirit. For Luffy, this is going to be the fight of his life, while for Kizaru, it's just another day at the office, if the office is you murdering anybody opposed to slavery. Now the Straw Hats are attempting to escape the island unnoticed, but before Kizaru can find them, they are stopped by the warlord Kuma. However, something is off about him. He never says a thing, and when they break him apart, they can see that underneath lies only the innards of a machine. It takes almost all the energy the Straw Hats have to defeat him, only to have their dreams crushed when another robot shows up with a Navy officer, Sentomaru. And just when it seems like things can't get any worse, Kizaru finds them. Similar to their last encounter with Kuzan, the Straw Hats are powerless against the Admiral. All of their attacks pass right through him because his body is made of light. But right before he can put an end to Zoro, he is stopped by Rayleigh. That's it. That's the chance the Straw Hats needed to escape. I knew they wouldn't die. They are the main characters after all. And who's going to buy skimpy Nami figurines if she's dead? However, Luffy is not aware that he's the main character. His optimistic nature has finally been challenged, and he screams at his friends to not fight and instead run for their lives. Luffy says that in 3 days they will meet up again at their ship the Thousand Sunny, but for now they have to escape. Several Kuma robots called pacifistas charge after every group of Straw Hats, while Sentomaru chases down Luffy, and none of them are fast enough to escape. Things finally aren't going Luffy's way. But before a pacifista can claim its first victim, it is stopped by the real warlord Kuma, and he uses his devil fruit power to make Zoro disappear. What follows is a brutal scene where Luffy is forced to watch each one of his best friends disappear right before his very own eyes. Friends whose lives he personally saved, flashed away in an instant, never to be seen again. All of the effort, all of the hardship, all of the pain, all of the great memories, gone. Just like in Arlong Park, Nami cries out while she says Tasukete, but this time Luffy can't be the hero. He can't be the captain they all thought he was. He is powerless. Will all of his friends die because of a battle he started? Will it all be his fault? Eventually, Kuma makes Nico Robin disappear, the same woman Luffy declared a war against the world to save, and finally, he breaks. Luffy begins to smash his face against the ground, fallen into a pit of despair. He wasn't good enough. He couldn't even save one of his best friends. He failed everyone. Now a broken man, alone, Kuma lays his hand on Luffy, and the dream of the Straw Hat Pirates has disappeared from the world. After soaring through the skies for a few days, Luffy crash lands alone on a strange island known as Amazon Lily. Luffy realizes that if he's still alive, then his friends must be alive as well, which makes him feel a lot better. And even though the main cast has survived, that doesn't mean that there wasn't a consequence for failure. Before, Luffy's friends were the center of his world, but now he has no one, and he won't be meeting up with them for a very long time. For some, it might be hard to watch on without their favorite characters, but to me, it gives the arc even more meaning. You want to see Luffy succeed even more so he can reunite with his friends, and when they all get back together, it'll feel like you're being reunited with a long-lost family. Unfortunately, Luffy finds himself in trouble pretty soon, as the island he's found himself on is full of a race made up of only women that are hostile to all male outsiders. Luffy runs away from the angry women until he crash lands through the highest building in the village, where their leader Boa Hancock is bathing. He sees a marking on her back, and Boa says that anybody who sees the secret contained on her back or the backs of her sisters has to be executed. Luffy is taken to an arena to be executed wounded in combat by her sisters. However, during the battle, one of the sisters' clothes on her back begin to burn away. Luffy decides to jump onto her back to protect her secret mark. Seeing this selfless act causes Hancock to call off the execution, and later reveal her full self to Luffy, in more ways than one. She explains that the mark on their backs is from when they were slaves to celestial dragons, and she keeps the marking hidden to hide her awful, humiliating past from the world. Boa asks if Luffy hates her now that he knows her past, to which Luffy says he only hates the celestial dragons. Feeling like she finally found someone who accepts her despite her trauma, Boa falls madly in love with Luffy. Boa decides to take Luffy back to Sabaody Archipelago to reunite with his friends, but before they can leave, Luffy learns from a newspaper that his only brother Fire Fist Ace is set to be executed in 6 days. The pirate Blackbeard defeated Ace and brought him to the Marines so that he could be promoted to the status of Warlord, which is a title given to pirate captains that are allied with the world government. Ace's Captain Whitebeard and his crew are heading to Marineford to put a stop to the execution by any means necessary. Luffy checks his Vivra card that is connected to Ace's life force and is always dragging towards Ace, and he sees that it's starting to burn up. Luffy knows what he has to do. He decides to put off finding his new family to save his old one on his most dangerous adventure yet, heading through hell and back to save his brother, no matter what. Similar to Blackbeard, Boa is also a warlord for the government. Of course, she hates the government due to her time as a slave and only partners with them to protect her tribe, so she agrees to Luffy's idea of infiltrating the prison Impel Down to free Ace, and after 4 days they arrive with 33 hours left before the execution. Impel Down is like One Piece's version of the 9 circles of hell from Dante's Inferno, but with 6 levels instead of 9. Each floor is themed around a different type of torture, the intensity increasing for every floor deeper you venture. Luffy sees prisoners getting cut up in a forest of blades while others are boiled alive, hung over a giant pit of fire, and forced to weather the dry heat of a desert or the icy coldness of a tundra. In times past, the enormous bounties for each Straw Hat might have felt like a joke, but now we see the very real torture that they could face if Luffy ever were to fail again like he did in Sabaody. The darker One Piece gets, the more meaningful it is to see Luffy still smile in spite of it all. On the way to Ace, Luffy teams up with 3 pirates that he and his crew have defeated across their previous journeys. Buggy the Clown, Mr. 3, and Bon Clay act as the budget Straw Hat pirates for this arc, but 2 of them aren't quite as loyal. Buggy and Mr. 3 have no desire to help Luffy reach the bottom of the prison, so they're looking for a way to leave him behind. However, Bon Clay is not like other pirates. He's a bit more flamboyant, but more importantly, the bond he forms with Luffy over the time they spend together in hell ends up becoming deeply important to him. Before Luffy, Bon was alone as the only overly optimistic goofball in his prison cell. Then Luffy saved him and shined his bright light into Bon's world. Luffy's honest desire to save his brother inspired Bon, so Bon has committed himself to venturing into the depths of hell with Luffy. Unfortunately for Bon, his friendship with Luffy is challenged when the warden of the prison, Magellan, stops Luffy in his tracks. Magellan's poison powers easily overwhelm Luffy, and Bon can do nothing but run away in fear. Buggy and Mr. 3 had already left Luffy behind earlier and only felt a little bit guilty. However, Bon can't live with himself if he were to abandon a friend. Instead, Bon knocks out the second in command at the prison, and he touches his face, which is necessary for Bon to be able to use his shape-shifting abilities. Now disguised as the assistant warden, Bon heads down to the frozen tundra on the 5th floor. This is where Magellan sent Luffy to suffer and die from all the poison he absorbed in the last fight. Bon breaks Luffy out and wanders into the woods in search of a miracle worker who was rumored to exist in the depths of Impel Down. However, before he can reach them, he is attacked by wolves. With the last of his energy, Luffy gets up and yells at the wolves, and he unconsciously releases a burst of energy that knocks all of them out. Afterwards, Luffy and Bon faint from their injuries in the cold snow. But death would not have them. Bon wakes up to find his oasis in the desert. In the deepest, darkest depths of any hardened prison lies an even harder Gay Bar. The miracle worker is none other than Emporio Ivankov. Eva also just so happens to be the second in command of the Revolutionary Army, which is headed by Luffy's father Dragon. Eva injects Luffy with an antidote to heal the poison, but it can only work if he has the willpower to survive 2 days of constant torture. Bond decides to scream words of encouragement non-stop to do everything in his power to help his good friend, and after only 10 hours, Luffy leaves the room a healed man. Eva injects Luffy with adrenaline hormones so that he doesn't pass out, and they rush off to floor 6 to find Ace. But unfortunately, they are too late. Luffy's brother has already been taken out from his cell to be transferred to Marineford, where he is to be executed. Luffy and Eva decide to break out Mr. Crocodile and Jinbei, two former warlords. However, before they can leave, they encounter the warlord who handed Ace to the Marines, Blackbeard Teach. He betrayed the Marines and broke into the prison despite having just become a government-allied warlord. Blackbeard tells Luffy that his original plan to become a warlord was to hand Luffy over to the Marines before Ace came to stop him, and now Ace is going to die in his place. Luffy wants to beat up Blackbeard right now, but Jinbei stops him. He says that they don't have time to fight someone more powerful than Ace. After all, the Warden Magellan is still searching for them somewhere in the prison. Luffy begrudgingly agrees, and they head off for the entrance. Unfortunately, Magellan finds the convicts and pursues them with a venom so dangerous that even a single drop can kill a man. Luffy runs and runs until they reach the entrance of the prison, and there's nowhere left to go. There's no boats, just dangerous Sea King-infested waters, and there isn't a single prisoner who can defeat Magellan in a fight. Just when it seems like all hope is lost, Jinbei tells Luffy over the transponder snail to jump into the water and trust him, so that's what they all do, and the prisoners are saved by whale sharks that Jinbei was able to summon. The whales take the pirates to a marine vessel that had been taken over by Crocodile, and they sail out of the prison, only to run into another problem. All the boats that sail around the marine bases of Impel Down, Marineford, and Enies Lobby are stuck inside a vortex that is protected with violent whirlpools. The only way to enter the vortex is to go through a door which can only be opened by a marine base. Fortunately for Luffy, Jinbei has already thought this through. The door opens, and he hands the transponder snail to Luffy so that he can say his last goodbye to Bon Clay, the man who risked everything to save Luffy's life again and again. The man who shouted for 10 hours straight just to help a friend. The man who showed us that real friendship can shine through even the darkest depths of hell. While Bon was disguised as the assistant warden, he touched the real Warden Magellan's face, giving him the ability to transform into the warden and order the prison officers to open the gates. When Bon first met Luffy in Alabasta, they were enemies, but Bon never held on to hate. He was the most selfless man locked in hell, and because of that, Bon volunteered to be the one who would never escape. Now all Bon can do is say goodbye one more time to his great friend before Magellan delivers his punishment. Once again, Luffy is heartbroken. He said he would do anything to save his brother, but he never thought that meant he would have to watch a good friend die. After a brief period of mourning, Luffy overcomes his sorrow the same way he did before, with thoughts of hope. Just like with his crew, he didn't directly see Bon die, so there's a chance he's still alive. No, this tragedy isn't going to be enough to break Luffy's optimistic spirit. With an even greater sense of determination, Luffy charges forward to Marineford, the war where the fate of his brother will finally be decided once and for all. However, the person most saddened by the beginning of the war isn't Luffy, it's Ace. Blackbeard was under his division in the Whitebeard pirates when he murdered his own allies and ran away. Whitebeard told Ace to let him go since he had a bad feeling about what would await them if they chased Blackbeard, but Ace couldn't accept that. He went against orders to exact his revenge, and now his pirate family as well as his only brother might all die because of him. Before the war can begin, Fleet Admiral Sengoku announces to the world that Ace's true father isn't Whitebeard like he claims, but instead Gol D. Roger, the legendary pirate king that once found the One Piece. As it turns out, Luffy is not Ace's brother by blood. They're brothers because growing up they had no one except each other and their other brother Sabo, who Luffy saw pass away. Whitebeard, also known as Edward Newgate, begins the war before Luffy can arrive, surprising the Marines by entering from underwater. He had coated his ships in protective bubbles to avoid being detected. Whitebeard launches the first attack with his Tremor fruit powers and sends a tsunami towards the Marines, but before he can wipe out half the army, Admiral Kuzan freezes the waves. Whitebeard may be outnumbered, but he alone possesses a devil fruit power so strong that he can destroy the world itself. The war quickly turns into a chaotic frenzy. It's a battle of ants dancing around the gods of the world, and Ace has another powerful friend coming to save him. A giant among giants emerges from the sea. Little Oars Jr. is prepared to tear Marineford apart if it means he can save his good friend Ace. He ignores Whitebeard's commands to stay with his allies and rushes forward towards Ace, enduring the full weight of the Marines' military strength. He knows that he's going to die, so he tries to take the warlord Doflamingo with him, only for Doflamingo to fly around him and sever his leg off with razor-sharp strings. Even with a severed leg, Oars doesn't give up. He breaches the plaza and reaches his hand out towards Ace, but he is finally stopped when the warlord Moria impales him with a giant spear. Ace is forced to watch as the first of his friends die in front of him because of his failures, and it won't be the last. To not let Oar's sacrifice be in vain, Whitebeard orders his men to climb the giant's body and enter Marineford, and so the frenzy continues. Another giant comes to avenge his fallen brethren and murder Doflamingo, only to find himself strung up as Dofi's puppet. The giant only wants to bring Doflamingo to justice, but Doflamingo tells him not to worry since justice will always prevail, justice being nothing more than whatever is written by the winners of the war. One thing Marineford does exceptionally well is how it sets up future plot threads. We want to see someone put Doflamingo in his place. Later, Luffy learns that the warlord Kuma who teleported him away from Sabaody has fully become a robot, stripped of any hint of consciousness, and we want to know, why did he let the Marines kill his mind? Why was his last conscious choice saving the Straw Hats? And we get to see returning characters from the very beginning of the show. Luffy's Marine friend from episode 1, Koby, is at the war, and he is running away. He wanted to be a Marine so he could be a soldier of justice, not witness a needless bloodbath. Just when he thought he was far from harm's way, Koby overhears Admiral Sakazuki murder a runaway Marine. It is now when Koby realizes that there is no way out of this hell. And here, as always, to break through the despair is Straw Hat Luffy. His ship was stuck on top of a frozen tsunami from the war's beginning, so he broke the ice apart and crash-landed onto the battlefield. Whitebeard recognizes Straw Hat, but he is not so pleased. He scorns Luffy for showing up to a battle he doesn't stand a chance at surviving, not because he wants to be mean, but because it would break his heart if Ace were to see his own brother be murdered. Of course, his criticism doesn't cause Luffy to waver. Instead, he charges forward, bright and optimistic as always, to save his brother. Next, Ace is the one to tell Luffy to not try to save him, which only causes Luffy to become more determined as he shouts, "I'm your brother." Ace continues to plead, to which Luffy replies, "Say whatever you want, I'm saving you even if I die." Several powerful Marines and warlords try to put an end to Luffy's quest, but every time he is protected by one of the friends he made along the way, like Eva or Boa. Boa is able to get away with attacking Marines while being on their side because she's just that beautiful. Boa also hands Luffy a key to Ace's handcuffs that she was able to obtain due to her influence as a warlord. Luffy hugs Boa, which she interprets as a marriage proposal. The Marines announce that they're speeding up the time of Ace's execution, which causes the Whitebeard pirates to advance faster. At first, it looks like they're doing this because they're afraid Whitebeard might reach Ace. However, this turns out to be a clever ploy. They wanted the pirates to advance further up so they could block them in the bay with the pacifista army that attacked Luffy and Sabaody. Something I love about Marineford is how, in addition to the powerful emotional scenes, there's also a ton of cool strategy and ability usage like this. So far, the strongest man in the world, Whitebeard, has yet to make his grand entrance to the battlefield, and right when he's about to join the fray, his own loyal pirate Squard stabs him through the stomach. Squard claims to everyone that Whitebeard made a deal for the Marines to save Ace and not target the Whitebeard pirates, as long as they could kill every other pirate faction Whitebeard allied with in the war. He says Whitebeard did this to set up Ace as the next king of the pirates. Worse still, the evidence seems to agree with Squard, as the pacifista army is only attacking pirates outside of Whitebeard's crew. Squard knows that he was lucky to have landed one blow on Whitebeard, so instead of fighting further, he prepares to die. And do you know what Whitebeard does for his betrayal? He throws his arm out towards Squard and holds him tightly in a fatherly embrace. Whitebeard tells Squard that he would never sell out any of his crew since he sees them all as his children, his family, and he would never sell out any pirate he's allied with. All of this was a ploy by the Marines to destroy the pirate alliance mid-battle. Squard begins to sob uncontrollably. How could he have tried to murder the man who took him in like a father, the man that the hopes of all people who fight against oppression rest upon? Now angrier than ever, Whitebeard shatters the frozen waves and jumps onto the battlefield. Whitebeard keeps making tremors until the waves themselves break apart and the deep cracks in the ground become a new enemy. One thing I love about One Piece is how amazingly powerful the strongest devil fruit users can be. It's awesome to see an entire island get completely obliterated under the weight of the gods battling on top of it. With the flame of passion emboldened by Whitebeard's display of love towards Squard, the pirates approach ever closer to the walls of Marineford. However, their enthusiasm is crushed when the walls of Marineford grow several times in height to trap the pirates with a barrage of cannon fire. Fortunately, one of the walls fails to rise under the weight of Oars Jr.'s corpse. Even now, his sacrifice is saving the hopes and dreams of the pirate army. But Admiral Sakazuki is determined to crush those foolish dreams. He uses his meteor powers to turn the battlefield into hell on earth, while cannon fire rains down from above. And just when it seemed like it would be impossible for anyone to breach the walls of Marineford, Luffy flies over the edge with Jinbei's water powers, a single pirate staring down the entire force of the Navy with only one thought on his mind: I have to save my brother. However, things aren't looking so good for the pirates in the bay. Sakazuki's meteors have melted the ice away, and the pirates are sitting ducks who are more likely to reach the end of a cannonball than the end of the dock. But Whitebeard had already planned this out ahead of time. He had another ship hidden under the water in a protective bubble that is able to save all of the surviving pirates. And as it turns out, the giant Oars Jr. was only playing dead. With the last of his strength, Oars grabs hold of the boat and shoves it into the dock. Afterwards, one final volley of cannon fire puts Oars Jr. out of his misery. And now with Whitebeard and Luffy finally inside of Marineford, the real battle can truly begin. Whitebeard approaches the plaza with a terrifying aura and begins to wipe out hordes of Marines. Unfortunately, Luffy doesn't have it so easy. A Vice Admiral slashes him up only for Kizaru to finish off the weakened Luffy. We have to keep in mind that Luffy hasn't actually slept since before he arrived at Impel Down, and now all that's keeping him going are the adrenaline hormones Eva injected into him. Kizaru kicks Luffy away, and he is caught by Whitebeard. Whitebeard tells him that he's done enough and should rest now, but Luffy resists. Again he screams, "Ace is my only brother in the world." Before he formed the Straw Hat Pirates, the only person Luffy had to give his life meaning was his big brother Ace, and if he loses him, then he'll lose a piece of himself. Even if he has no chance of victory, even if he's marching on to certain death, Luffy has to keep going because he'd rather die than live in a world without his only brother. And that's exactly what Luffy tells Eva when he begs him for more adrenaline hormones. Eva doesn't want to destroy the boy anymore, but he also deeply wants to see Luffy save his brother, so he agrees to the dangerous plan. Ace begins to cry as he looks at all the devastation his life has brought to those he loves. He thinks back to when he was a child, hearing about how awful his father, the Pirate King, was, wondering if it was a good thing that he was born at all, and now he can see that because of him, everything is falling apart. Although he's in pain, seeing his friends fight for his sake makes him start to cry tears of joy. Ace thought he made his peace with death, but now he has to admit that he still really wants to live in spite of it all. While Ace regains his will to live, the Whitebeard pirates encounter an awful setback. Whitebeard collapses to the floor due to his terminal illness. He had been stoically holding in his pain, but now in combat against the most powerful Marines in combination with his wounds from Squard, he can't maintain his composure. His strongest pirates are distracted from the injury, causing the admirals to launch even more hits against the Whitebeard pirates. But never fear, because despite how hopeless everything is, Luffy's optimistic spirit is still burning bright. Luffy tears through the Marines and the Vice Admirals alike until he reaches his friend Koby. Koby steeled himself and is now prepared for war, even if it means he'll have to murder his own friend. Koby launches his attack at Luffy, only to find himself bloody and broken on the floor. In reality, overcoming his fear never really mattered, because in a fight between gods, ants can only struggle to survive. Unfortunately, the more difficult fight between the admirals and the Whitebeard pirates is not going as well as Luffy's charge. Distracted by Whitebeard's injuries, his two strongest pirates are now seriously wounded, and Jinbei is trapped in chains. Now Whitebeard is alone, still trying to recover from his illness while the entire navy surrounds him. They stab him with multiple blades and blast him with cannon fire. The pirates rush to his aid, but he tells them to stop. Whitebeard says, "Do they really think they can beat me so easily? I don't need any help, because I'm Whitebeard." Feeling inspired, Jinbei tears off his chains and the pirates regroup for another offensive. If Kizaru is like the opposite of Luffy due to his apathetic nature, Whitebeard is like if Luffy became more mature but never let his spirit die. Underneath Whitebeard's stoic demeanor is the same optimistic spirit that pushes Luffy to never give up on his friends and family, no matter the odds. But the Marines are determined to break his spirit, so they begin the execution of Ace. Whitebeard wants to stop them with a ranged attack or a tremor, but he falls down due to his wounds. While the blades lower towards Ace's head, Luffy begins to scream so loudly that he unconsciously summons Conqueror's Haki. Just like with the wolves in Impel Down, all of the weaker Marines around him as well as the executioners collapse to the ground. Sensing this is his last desperate opportunity to save Ace, Whitebeard commands all of his pirates to leave him and back up Luffy. Now Whitebeard is alone, and the Marines order all of their troops to focus on killing him, but this only makes Whitebeard smile. While Whitebeard goes on a rampage, many foes attempt to take Luffy down, but every time they are stopped by one of his allies. Eventually, Eva's assistant, who possesses the Scissor fruit, cuts up the ground to create a path for Luffy to reach his brother. But right before Luffy can reach Ace, he is stopped by his own grandfather, Garp, the hero of the Navy. Garp declares that if Luffy wants to save Ace, he'll have to kill him first. Now there's no getting around it. One of Luffy's two closest family members will have to die today. Luffy screams that he can't do it, but Garp won't back down. Many years ago, the Pirate King asked Garp to look after his son Ace, and over time Garp began to see Ace as his own child, but that won't prevent him from carrying out his duty as a Vice Admiral. Garp hurls his fist towards Luffy with all of his strength, but right before it can connect, he hesitates. He remembers watching over Luffy and Ace when they were kids. His attack misses. Luffy slams his fist into Garp's face, and the hero of the Navy is defeated after only one punch. On a side note, if you want to avoid major spoilers, I would stop around here. Alright, back to the war. Luffy reaches Ace and tries to unlock his cuffs, only for Kizaru to break the key in half with a light beam. One of the guards Luffy knocked out earlier with his haki wakes up, and luckily it's Mr. 3, one of the pirates Luffy freed from Impel Down. Although he was previously a selfish man like Buggy the Clown, seeing Bon Clay sacrifice himself has inspired him to be better. Mr. 3 bravely infiltrated the Marines with the goal of using his wax powers to create a key to unlock Ace's cuffs, but his plan was interrupted by Luffy's haki. Before Mr. 3 is able to break out Ace, Fleet Admiral Sengoku turns into a giant Buddha statue and destroys the execution stand. Mr. 3 hands Luffy a wax key midair while cannonballs fly towards them, and they are lost in a black cloud left from the explosion. The Marines confidently surround the smoke, waiting to see if the brothers are dead, but before it can clear, fire bursts out of the dark cloud. The mist parts to reveal Ace freed from his Sea Prism Stone handcuffs and able to use his fire powers once again. Luffy did it. After losing all of his closest friends in Sabaody, journeying through hell and back in Impel Down, and after surviving one of the most brutal wars the world of One Piece has ever known, he has finally done it. With the entire world betting against him, Luffy has finally saved his only brother, Fire Fist Ace. There are no words to describe how satisfying it is to see Luffy with his brother again after all this time. One key to any good battle or war arc is to have an intense back and forth between both sides where the advantage is constantly shifting, and Marineford does this so well that it plays out like an intense roller coaster ride of emotions. Just when Whitebeard collapses and all hope is lost, there Luffy is to turn the tide of war and save his brother. And another old face reappears to press the advantage. Squard takes command of a ship and charges into the plaza, ready to give his life to the cause, but his boat is stopped by none other than Whitebeard. Whitebeard asks, "Can't you understand how ungrateful it is for a child to die before his parent, Squard?" To Whitebeard, each one of his crewmates are his children, and he can't bear to watch any of them die when it's not their time. Whitebeard tells everyone that they have already accomplished their goal here, and his final order is for everyone to escape. The Whitebeard pirates begin to protest, so he severs the ground in half behind him. As his final act of strength, the strongest man in the world plans to hold off the entire Marine army by himself while his children live on. Ace doesn't want to leave his dad behind, but he also understands that if he dies, then he'll be disgracing everyone who sacrificed themselves to save him. Ace bows to his father, but the words just won't come out. Instead, Whitebeard breaks the silence. He says, "We don't need words right now. Just tell me one thing, Ace. Were you happy to have me as your father?" Ace breaks down into tears. He never knew his real dad, Gold D. Rogers, and what Whitebeard gave him goes beyond just teaching him how to be a pirate. He taught him how to live. He showed him how amazing life could be when you valued family over fame or riches. Ace yells back to Whitebeard, "Of course I am." And that's all Whitebeard needed to hear to be happy with the end of his life. Ace runs with his crewmates back to the ocean, but Admiral Sakazuki trails behind them. Sakazuki tries to lure Ace away by insulting Whitebeard's legacy. He says that even if Ace's real father, Rogers, was an evil pirate, at least he was an ambitious, feared, respected pirate, not a complete loser like Whitebeard, who only ever cared about some make-believe family he pretended to have. Whitebeard never achieved a single thing of real value. He lived a pathetic life, and now he's going to die a pathetic death. Ace knows it's a trap. He knows he needs to run away, but he can't. Ace can't let someone insult his father like that, the man who saved his life. Ace charges forward, and his fist meets Sakazuki's, but he lacks the power and the ability type needed to win. Sakazuki's magma burns through Ace's fire, and Ace is sent back. In a somewhat delirious state from the adrenaline wearing off, Luffy drops Ace's Vivre card, the card that drags him to where Ace is at all times. Luffy falls to the ground and reaches for his card, which Sakazuki sees as a great opportunity. Sakazuki proclaims that he doesn't care if every pirate gets away, as long as he's able to murder both brothers and remove their tainted bloodlines from existence. While Ace is still recovering from the last blow, Sakazuki flies over his head and attempts to murder the weakened Luffy. He thrusts his magma fist towards Luffy, but before he can put an end to the Son of Dragon once and for all, his fist is blocked by Ace's back. Ace stands over his brother, his entire chest impaled from Sakazuki's fist. Luffy is frozen. Sakazuki prepares to finish off the brother he had intended to kill with his last blow, but he is stopped by Jinbei. Garp marches forward towards Sakazuki, prepared to give up his position as Vice Admiral and become a criminal, but he is stopped by Sengoku, who throws him onto the ground. Garp says that if he lets go of him, he'll kill Sakazuki himself. And after all that pain of losing his best friends, losing Bon Clay, and seeing his brother impaled by a fist, Luffy still refuses to give up. He still refuses to let the fire die. He asks for a medic, however they say there's nothing they can do for a wound like that. But that's not enough to make Luffy give up. He never gives up. Instead, Ace has to be the one to make him see reality. He says it's no use. His internal organs have been incinerated, and he doesn't have long for this world. Ace tells Luffy to send his regards to Dadan, the woman who raised them. Now facing his death, he's even beginning to miss the woman he used to always rebel against. Luffy yells at Ace to stop saying he's going to die, but Ace continues anyway. He says that the thing that made him want to continue living the most was the thought that he would be able to see Luffy achieve his dream and become king of the pirates. He knows he can do it, and he has no regrets dying to save his little brother. Luffy lashes out and calls him a liar, but he reassures Luffy that he isn't lying. When Ace first set out, he thought he was doing it for fame, but over time he realized that wasn't true. The truth was, he wanted to know the answer to the question, did I deserve to be born? Being the son of an infamous pirate like Gold D. Rogers, he never knew the answer to that question. Becoming Luffy's brother, becoming Whitebeard's son, all of that was a part of his search for the answer. Ace says he's too weak to shout to the rest of his family, so he asks his brother Luffy to tell them these words for him. Father, everyone, and you, Luffy, I've always been such a hopeless person. I was demon spawn, the son of the devil. Thank you for loving me. Tears run down Ace's face as he says his final goodbye to his only brother in the world one last time. Unfortunately, Ace never did find the answer to his question of if the child of the devil deserved to be born. But what he did find was a wonderful family who loved him regardless, and in his final moments, that's the only thing that really mattered to him. Ace's body goes limp, and he falls out of Luffy's hands onto the ground. The last embers of his Vibra card burn to ash. Ace is dead. There isn't anywhere left to run, nothing left to do. There's nowhere for Luffy's optimistic spirit to burn any longer. Although Luffy usually looks like a happy, friendly guy, for much of his life he was all alone. He never knew the love of a father or a mother. He only had his reluctant caretaker Dadan and some visits from Garp and Shanks. The only person who was always there for him was Ace, his only brother Ace, the family he loves most in the world, and now there's nothing. Luffy breaks down in tears while he screams violently into the sky, the color having left his eyes completely. This wasn't supposed to happen. This can't happen. Up until now, Luffy approached most conflicts with a smile on his face, since he always knew that if he never gave up, he could beat any enemy and save any friend. But when it mattered most, he failed. He couldn't save his only brother. Transponder snails record the event, showing to the world Luffy's sorrow. He screams and cries and wails until he loses all sense of himself, and eventually he loses his voice completely. Throughout all of One Piece, Luffy's optimistic spirit burned brighter than any star, never wavering whether he lost a friend or lost his entire crew, whether he ventured through hell itself or struggled through the horrors of war. The flame always burned bright, but now the flame has finally gone out. Luffy made every sacrifice he could to save Ace, yet in the end, Ace died protecting him because Luffy was too weak to save himself. Luffy has become a shell of a man, scarred, battered, and broken beyond belief. There's nothing left in him except for pain. And despite all of this horror, Sakazuki still is not done trying to murder Straw Hat Luffy. Jinbei and Marco try to hold them off, but they can only do so much against such a powerful admiral. Still, the Whitebeard pirates can't let Luffy die. If both brothers were to die, they wouldn't be able to live with themselves anymore, so they struggle on against impossible odds. Whitebeard knew he was headed towards certain death, but it was all worth it so he could save his son. And now instead he has to suffer through the greatest tragedy that can befall any good father. To watch his son die young, knowing he'll never be able to live the amazing life he could have had, that's the pain he'll have to carry as he faces death. Rage takes hold of every inch of Whitebeard's body. He slams a tremor against Sakazuki's head until the ground itself begins to break apart. Sakazuki manages to impale Whitebeard, but he's already been impaled many times today, and he isn't going to let one more wound slow him down. Whitebeard slams his tremor fist against Sakazuki so hard that the air itself begins to split apart, shattering the island into pieces. A weakened Sakazuki slides on the shifting ground until he disappears into the depths below the cracks of the destroyed city. The cracks continue to widen until the island is separated into two chunks, one with all of the pirates, and the other with the Marines and Whitebeard himself. Whitebeard's soldiers cry out in pain, not wanting to watch their father die after they already lost a brother, but he's made up his mind. This is going to be Whitebeard's last stand, him versus the entire Navy army. Ace is dead, Luffy is broken, Whitebeard is going to die, and just when you think things couldn't get any worse, that's when he arrives. Blackbeard Teach and his men were hiding inside of Marineford this whole time, and now with the buildings breaking apart, they are forced to make their entrance. Blackbeard reveals the truth behind why he murdered one of Whitebeard's children while he was still a part of his crew. He needed to steal the strongest devil fruit power of them all, the Dark Fruit, which grants its user the ability to negate other people's devil fruit abilities. However, Whitebeard is not so impressed. He doesn't need any powers to cut down a traitor. He holds Blackbeard's arms so he can't absorb anything and slams a tremor against his face, destroying the ground even more than before. Blackbeard is terrified. He pulls out his gun and screams, "You should be dead," like life has cheated him out of a victory through impossibly bad luck. But right before Whitebeard can send Teach to his grave, his tremor vanishes. Blackbeard was right. Of course he was right. His plans are always right. After all, he appeared right when Whitebeard should have been at his limit, and that one bullet from Blackbeard was enough to disrupt his abilities for a moment. A crucial moment. That's it. That is the chance Blackbeard needed. He orders all of his crew to attack Whitebeard with everything they have, and what follows is a brutal execution by gunfire. The Whitebeard pirates are powerless to do anything but watch as their father is riddled with bullet holes, blood pouring out of every wound. They shoot and shoot until they run out of bullets, and still, Whitebeard is not dead. He remembers a conversation with his friend and rival Gold D. Roger, and Whitebeard says, "It's not you, Teach. The man Gold D. Roger was waiting for. It's not you, Teach. Not a damn chance." Just as there are people out there who inherited Roger's will, soon enough someone will carry on in Ace's name as well. You may try to destroy their spirit, but you will never extinguish their flame. So it has been, and so it shall continue to be from now till the very end of time. And one day in the future, when we're all dead and gone, someone will arise carrying generations upon generations of our history on his shoulders, and he'll throw down the gauntlet in front of the entire world. Sengoku, you and the government know what's coming. A war that will embroil the seas far and wide. That's why you're so afraid, though nothing you can do will stop it. I've no interest in it myself, but someday that treasure will turn this world upside down. You know what I'm talking about, and I'm sure that someone will find it. Whether you like it or not, that day will come soon. Whitebeard looks up and shouts, "The One Piece! The One Piece is real!" Underneath Whitebeard's stoic demeanor lies a heartbroken man who wants to break down just like Luffy. He just went through the greatest pain a father can bear, to see his own son murdered right in front of his eyes. A part of him wants to break down, but he refuses. He doesn't let even the greatest pain known to man cause him to collapse. He has to stay strong. For them, for his family, for Luffy, and for Ace. He has to be strong, because as any good father knows, this isn't all about him. It never was. It's about the future of his family, and for his family, Whitebeard has to be more than just a man. He has to be a symbol of hope that keeps fighting no matter the odds. A reminder to Luffy that even when his spirit is shattered and broken beyond repair, that there is still light out there, if he can only keep striving towards it. A reminder to everyone watching that when darkness closes in on all sides, the flame of hope still exists. Even if its light is dim today, sometime in the future it will shine brightly again. One day, even a broken man like Luffy will find a way to smile again. With the last of his time in this world, Whitebeard loudly proclaims that the One Piece is real. When I first heard this, chills ran down my entire body. Before I watched One Piece, I heard this phrase in a meme and assumed the line was some goofy battle cry, but I couldn't have been more wrong. It's one of the most iconic lines in anime because it represents one man's will to hold on to hope in the face of absolute tragedy. When Whitebeard says the One Piece is real, it's his final act of defiance, reminding the Marines that no matter how things look now, one day their oppressive regime will end, and freedom will return to the people. A reminder that even if it hurts now, you can keep marching on towards those sunny days. It won't be like this forever. One day things will change. One day everything will change. Whitebeard apologizes to his sons one last time, and thinks back to when he was young. All the other pirates were obsessed with gold and riches, and they didn't understand why he cared so little for those things. They asked him, if he doesn't want riches, what does he want then? Whitebeard replied, "There's one thing I've wanted ever since I was a kid, a family." Whitebeard says he is grateful to his sons one last time before finally letting himself fade away. And with that, the greatest father the world has ever known takes his leave. Whitebeard dies standing tall, never backing down, even in his last moments. Although I can enjoy lighthearted stories, I find that it is through tragedy that the human spirit shines brightest. To me, the pain you feel during the lowest points of life gives even greater meaning to the good. When you know how painful it feels to see love be destroyed, you want to protect the love you do have so much more. In that way, darker tragedies touch the human soul in a way that other stories simply can't. However, the deep emotions of a tragedy only truly have meaning when joy is properly established. In a dark show like Attack on Titan, Eren Yeager goes on and on about how he longs for freedom, but what does that truly mean? All I've ever seen in that show is a boy who longs to escape to a reality that he's never seen. To Eren, freedom means escape since his life's mostly just been awful, and that may work for a dark show like Attack on Titan, but it's not nearly as emotionally compelling or powerful as something like One Piece. Luffy's main desire in One Piece sounds the same as Eren's on the surface, which is to be free, but freedom means something completely different for Luffy because Luffy is free every day he's with his loved ones. Luffy shows us how amazing freedom is by living it every day. We have seen hundreds of great episodes of Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, Nami, and the others exploring the world without being under the thumb of a dictator, and their goofy freak hair nature is the real goal. It's not about the One Piece, it's about the friends you made along the way. In Attack on Titan, freedom is empty, while in One Piece, it's the whole point. In Attack on Titan, I don't feel sad when someone dies because all I see is a person being relieved from having to suffer through more useless pain. But when Ace died, tears poured out of my eyes because I know the amazing life I won't get to see because of his death. I can see all the future adventures Luffy imagined he would go on with his brother. I can see the future life that Whitebeard won't be able to watch over from heaven. I can see how the pain of loss crushed what was once the happiest man in all of One Piece, and I want to see him smile again. A tragedy with almost no happiness means a whole lot less than a tragedy where joy is truly established, and the tragedy of Marineford makes the joy of One Piece shine even more brightly. The only time I've ever cried from experiencing any piece of art in my entire life was when I rewatched Ace's death and Luffy's breakdown during the creation of this video. I had thought that my sensitive emotions were too deeply repressed to cry over art, but One Piece showed me that even a person like me can find enough beauty in life to still cry when it gets taken away. Even a person like me can be filled with hope when all I see is despair. Ace is dead, Whitebeard is dead, and Luffy is broken, but the terror of war carries on. Where some men see tragedy, others see opportunity, and Blackbeard is overjoyed beyond belief. He throws a blanket over Whitebeard and heads under it. After he comes out, he declares war on the Marines and shatters the ground apart with the power of the Tremor fruit. Blackbeard's true power was never simply dispelling devil fruit powers. No, the real reason why the dark fruit is the strongest of them all is because it grants its user the ability to absorb other people's devil fruit powers upon death. With the power of dispelling all devil fruit abilities in one hand, and the power to destroy the entire world in the other, no one will be able to put an end to Blackbeard's reign. He will be the one to usher in a new age under the banner of his pirate flag, not a marine flag. Just when you think this arc couldn't get any more intense, there Blackbeard is to steal the show away. All of this war, the conflict between Whitebeard and the Marines, Luffy's torment, all of it was a part of his plan. He defeated Ace and handed him over to the government to become a warlord. He entered Impel Down with his warlord status and took over their operations room, then used one of his pirate's hypnosis abilities to have the guards open and close the great gates that blocked entry to Marineford. He waited inside of Marineford until the time was right to steal Whitebeard's power. We didn't need another twist that turns everything up on its head to make this arc any more perfect, but that's just one more reason why Marineford is the greatest war arc ever written. While the Marines wallow in despair, watching their fortress of justice be completely and utterly destroyed, all Blackbeard can do is laugh. He announces that he will sink Marineford to the bottom of the ocean, but Fleet Admiral Sengoku will not allow this to happen. Sengoku flies down to Blackbeard in his Buddha form and proclaims that he will not let anyone put an end to the law and order that has protected these seas for centuries, and their battle begins. At the same time as their battle, Sakazuki has still not given up on trying to murder Straw Hat Luffy. As it turns out, falling into the cracks of a destroyed island isn't enough to kill a devil fruit user who can fly. Sakazuki is still alive, livid with anger, and his rage will not be satiated until both of the anarchist brothers have been executed, so that no one will ever again think of standing against the law. Jinbei and Eva try their best to defend Luffy from the murderous admiral. Jinbei knows he can't win a fight on land, so he runs to the sea, only to find himself trapped by Admiral Kuzan's ice. There's nowhere left for him to run, no way to save Luffy. Sakazuki slams his fist through Jinbei so hard that the flames impale him, but this time Luffy is not fully protected. A giant scar forms over Luffy's chest, one of many from this day that will never fade away. Sakazuki orders Jinbei to stop defending Straw Hat. He remarks that Luffy would have gone through much less pain and suffering if he was able to pierce his heart the first time. And even with a hole in his chest, Jinbei refuses to give up on Luffy. But what can he really do against a godlike threat like Sakazuki? The Admiral raises his arm to finish what he started, only to find himself cut in half from the waist down. Crocodile, the warlord Luffy freed and impelled down, has come to save him despite them having once been enemies. He sends Jinbei and Luffy flying through the air with his sand, and the man they just so happen to bump into midair is none other than Buggy the Clown. During the war, Buggy told the pirates he saved and impelled down that he would be the one to kill Whitebeard, but all he ended up doing was sitting on the sidelines, too scared to move. He was drowning in his own self-pity when Jinbei slammed into him. Ace failed, Luffy failed, and Whitebeard is gone, so the only hero left to save the day is Buggy the Clown. But there isn't time for Buggy to even understand what's going on before Sakazuki's magma fist hurls towards him. Buggy versus one of the strongest men in all of existence. And just when things are looking grim for Buggy, Whitebeard's surviving family shows up to defend Ace's little brother. They can't let him die too. Of course, a part of Buggy wants to drop Luffy and run away, but his men are watching. And somewhere deep down in his cold, shrunken down heart, he's grown to care for Luffy. Luffy was only ever kind and selfless towards Buggy and Impel Down, but that didn't stop him from abandoning Luffy. Maybe deep down Luffy reminds Buggy of who he could be if he was strong and kind, so he decides to protect Luffy. Buggy keeps flying away until a submarine emerges from the ocean. Trafalgar Law, a pirate that Luffy ran into in Sabaody Archipelago, is also a doctor, and he is here to save Luffy. While the old Buggy would have dropped Luffy long ago, now he refuses to give him up. He won't risk Luffy dying to some pirate with a sword claiming to be a doctor. And at the same time as Buggy's predicament, Blackbeard's battle has done considerable damage to the island. Everything is falling apart. The Pacifista army is closing in on the pirates, and Sakazuki won't stop fighting until Straw Hat is dead. Amidst all of the chaos, Koby begins to break down. He can't handle it anymore. This wasn't the idealistic vision of justice he was promised when he joined the Marines. This is nothing more than senseless slaughter for the sake of more death while the world falls apart around you. The pirates are the ones trying to flee, to end the war, but the Marines don't want to let anyone leave alive. The Marines don't even care that Blackbeard is about to sink the entire island. All they care about is shedding more blood before the end, and he can't handle it anymore. Koby snaps, and he begins to charge back into the front lines, back into the hellfire. Meanwhile, Buggy is forced to hand Luffy over to Law after two admirals show up ready to take Luffy's head. Kizaru and Sakazuki are determined to finish what they started. Sakazuki prepares one last hit to destroy Law's submarine and put an end to the legend of Straw Hat Luffy once and for all, but that's when it happens. Koby runs in front of the most terrifying admiral in the Marines, and at the top of his lungs he screams, "That's enough! Stop already. All this fighting. Just end it." Koby says that they're sacrificing more Marines who have families to return to just to murder an enemy that's already surrendered, when what they should be doing is saving the lives of the people they care about. If they keep murdering and killing when they could be saving lives, then they're making the soldiers who are going to die for no reason look like idiots for having ever trusted the Marines. Even amidst the nihilistic brutality of war, Koby hangs on to that dream that he and Luffy once shared when they first met. The dream that one day even a Marine and a pirate could be friends. Unfortunately for Koby, Sakazuki is not impressed. For the crime of wasting an admiral's time when he could have been enforcing justice, Sakazuki sentences him to death. He thrusts his magma fist towards Koby, ready to impale another victim, but once again he is stopped. Pirate Emperor Red-Haired Shanks has finally arrived. The man who gave Luffy his straw hat is here at last to put an end to the war. He was unable to be at the start of the war as he had to fend off Pirate Emperor Kaido from harming Whitebeard before it began, and because of Koby's bravery, he was able to reach Marineford in time to save Luffy. Those precious few seconds that Koby's speech brought will alter the fate of mankind forever. However, all of this sentimentality is lost on the admirals, as their only priority is to kill Straw Hat Luffy. Although Sakazuki cannot do much with his magma underwater, Kuzan sends a pillar of ice through the ocean that almost freezes the submarine in place, and Kizaru casts rays of light to finish them off. With the submarine either gone or destroyed, there's nothing left for the Marines to do other than listen to Shanks' request to stop fighting. Of course, the Marines don't have much choice with their army and island mostly destroyed, but who Shanks was really asking wasn't the Marines, it was the strongest man on the island, Blackbeard Teach. Blackbeard says he isn't fully ready to fight Shanks yet, and leaves the massacre with a smile on his face. Before he leaves, Shanks only asks one thing from Sengoku, to allow him to bury Whitebeard and Ace. Sengoku agrees, and with that, the greatest war in all of One Piece. No, the greatest war from any anime, manga, or piece of literature is finally over, and it ends perfectly. There are dozens of plot threads left unanswered, plenty of confrontations left to look forward to. Luffy avenging Ace, Shanks battling Blackbeard, the final war between the Marines and the pirates. So much happened in this war, yet it ends with so much left to do, because it's both a climax to Luffy's arc before the time skip, and an introduction to the greatest faction war ever conceived in fiction, the War of One Piece. At the end of the war, Boa sets sail after the submarine, having her snake swim underwater to help track down their path. Once the submarine surfaces, she asks Law to let Luffy rest on her island. Boa won't be able to live with herself if the man she plans to marry one day passes away. For 2 weeks after the war's end, Luffy stays in a comatose state, and when he finally wakes up, all he can feel is rage. Luffy demands to know where Ace is. Even 2 weeks after his death, Luffy still hasn't given up on saving his brother. He wants his break with reality to continue forever, but the memories of Ace's limp body falling out of his hands come rushing back, tearing him apart every time. Luffy begins to lose control. He destroys an entire mountain and collapses onto the ground. Jinbei approaches Luffy. Back at Impel Down, Ace asked him to protect his little brother. At the time, Jinbei didn't agree to anything, but now he knows what he has to do. He tells Luffy that the war is over, but before he can tell Luffy the truth about Ace, Luffy interrupts him. Luffy knows that he's been lying to himself for a while now, because he couldn't stand to live with the grief of losing his brother. The same brother that promised to be there after they both became great pirates. Now all the pain and the memories come rushing into Luffy at once, and all he can do is cry out in pain. How could he have ever thought that he could be the Pirate King when he's too weak to save his only brother in the whole world? Now all Luffy wants to do is destroy the forest until he breaks his body beyond repair. He tells Jinbei to leave him be, but Jinbei refuses. Jinbei tells him to stop destroying his body, but Luffy says it's his body and he can do whatever he wants with it. Jinbei responds by saying that if Luffy is free to destroy himself, Ace was also free to sacrifice himself for Luffy, regardless of what anyone else wanted. Hearing this makes Luffy even more mad. He lashes out at Jinbei, forcing Jinbei to hurt him even more. Jinbei grabs Luffy by the throat and tells him that even though a horde of enemies has shattered his spirit, and even though he's lost his guiding light, he can't let himself be consumed by grief and self-blame. He can't view his entire life as a failure, thinking only of what he's lost. He needs to think about everything he still has. There are still people out there waiting for him to come back into their lives. Zoro, Nami, Usopp, Chopper, Sanji, Robin, Frankie, Brook, all of his closest friends that vanished in Sabaody are still out there, waiting. Luffy unclenches his fist. He knows Jinbei is right. He knows he can't give up on himself, on his dreams, because if he gave up on those things, it would be the same thing as him giving up on his crew, on his friends. And Luffy never gives up on his friends. He can't end his life, because deep down what he wants more than anything is to see them again. Luffy submits to Jinbei's advice, and just like what he asked Nico Robin to tell him back in Ani's lobby, he decides that he wants to live again. After the Straw Hats disappeared from Sabaody, Kuma told Dark King Rayleigh where Luffy was sent, and in search of him he heads to Amazon Lily. Once there, he manages to convince Luffy that he shouldn't head back to meet up with his crew just yet. Luffy is immediately reminded of how awful their last visit went. Instead, Rayleigh suggests a different plan. Luffy heads back to Marineford and rings the bell repeatedly to get the attention of the Marines. Someone takes a photo of this event, and news of Luffy's reckless behavior spreads all across the world. He quickly retreats from Marineford, but the Straw Hats notice something peculiar about the photo. Luffy's arm says 3D2Y, with 3D crossed out. Back when they were running from the robots in Sabaody, Luffy told his crew to run away and meet up in Sabaody in 3 days. Now all the Straw Hats know there's been a change in plans. They aren't ready yet. Instead of 3 days, Luffy will have to go without seeing his crew for 2 years. 2 years of intense physical training with Rayleigh, so that he can become the man he's always wanted to be. A man strong enough to save his friends. A man strong enough to save his brother. When Luffy and Sakazuki meet next, he won't be some helpless kid. He'll be stronger. He'll be the man who's destined to walk the path of Gol D. Rogers. He'll be Luffy, the next king of the pirates, the man who never gave up on his brother, and the man who will never give up on his friends or on himself ever again. And no matter where Luffy goes from here on out, whether it be the highest peaks or the lowest hells, his brother will always be right behind him. When I first saw Marineford, I thought this might be the best war arc ever made. However, after rewatching the entire Summit War saga, now I am certain that not only is this the greatest war arc ever made, but that nothing will ever surpass it. Oda is a once-in-a-century type of artist, with the work ethic to craft an impossibly large manga like One Piece, and the genius to capitalize on every seed of world building that he plants. The fact that Marineford both has hundreds of episodes of build-up while also planting the seeds for hundreds of more amazing episodes with new engaging heroes and villains, while also being a masterclass in strategic ability-based combat writing, while also having the emotional peak of one of the greatest stories ever told in fiction, is so amazing that there aren't words that can truly capture how awe-inspiring it really is. I guess that's why most One Piece fans don't write an entire essay expressing their feelings and instead sum it up with one word: peak. One Piece is the peak. One interesting thing about One Piece is that even though it is not a grimdark anime, the world of One Piece does feel grimdark. An important element for grimdark stories like A Song of Ice and Fire is that there are no clear good guy factions, just different shades of evil, and many factions inside of One Piece are just like that. The world government supports slavery and finances many clearly immoral pirate warlords, and their main rival, the pirate emperors, aren't much better. Outside of Shanks, Big Mom and Kaido are abusive tyrants, and now with Whitebeard gone, common bandits have begun to pillage without fear of consequence, and the revolutionary army is stretched too thin to help many people. Whitebeard stood out as one of the last beacons of hope providing peace to the world of One Piece, but now he and Ace are gone, and with their deaths the last flames of hope in the entire world of One Piece have been snuffed out. If you were a person living in this world, you would see it as a grimdark one, a world where all hope had been lost. But the great thing about One Piece is that it doesn't get lost in the darkness. Instead, the misery just makes us more excited to see Luffy pull himself back together and pick up the torch Whitebeard left behind. Even if it doesn't seem possible, even if everyone else has given up, Luffy will keep holding on to that flame of hope, onto the dream of freedom, not because he lives his life solely for some far-off goal, but because he wants to spread that sense of joy that he feels with his friends around to every corner of the world until everyone has a smile on their face, until every last person is free. A grimdark series like A Song of Ice and Fire can be interesting to watch for sure, but the bloated books have gotten lost in their own nihilism without a clear, hopeful goal to work towards, whereas One Piece can feel realistically dark while not losing sight of hope. George R.R. Martin may have given up hope for a good king, but in One Piece we still have hope that a good king, or in this case, a happy pirate, will free the world from itself. That desire to fight corruption and spread freedom no matter the odds, combined with showing us how amazing life can be when you are free, is exactly why One Piece is the anime that has inspired the world. And maybe if we were all a little bit more like Luffy, the world really would be a better place. Thank you for watching.